The heavy oak doors of the reception hall burst open with a sound like thunder, and I stumbled in. Rainwater streamed from my hair, my suit clinging to me like a second skin, and the scent of cheap whiskey probably announced my arrival before the sight of me did. The music, some saccharine love song, screeched to a halt, a record scratch in the symphony of what was supposed to be her perfect day. Every head in that opulent, flower-drenched room turned towards me. And then I saw her. Eliza, my Eliza. Or rather, not my Eliza anymore. She was a vision in white, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside and the one brewing in my chest. Her eyes, wide and shocked, locked with mine. Beside her, Daniel, her new husband, stood tall and stoic, his hand possessively on her arm. 3 months earlier, I wanted to scream. She was in my bed, whispering promises against my skin, telling me she'd never love anyone the way she loved me. The words caught in my throat, a bitter cocktail of booze and regret. 2 burly security guards, looking like they'd stepped out of a mob movie, started towards me. "Sir, you need to leave," one of them growled, his hand reaching for my arm. I swatted it away, a pathetic show of defiance. I wasn't going anywhere, not yet. I hadn't figured out why I was here, but I knew I couldn't leave. Then Daniel did something I didn't expect. He held up a hand, stopping the guards. He looked at me, his expression surprisingly calm, almost pitying. "Nathan," he said, his voice even, cutting through the silence. "What do you want?" His question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. What did I want? To turn back time? To make her see she was making a mistake? To drag her out of there and back to our life? The one we'd built? Suddenly, the alcohol-fueled bravado drained out of me, leaving me hollow and exposed. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes pressed down on me. I was a spectacle, a fool in a dripping suit, crashing a party I was never meant to be at. Eliza's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Shock, definitely. Anger, for sure. But beneath it, I saw something else. A flicker of... was it regret? Or was that just my desperate heart projecting its own wishes? I looked around at the stunned faces, the judgmental stares, the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. My grand gesture, my last-ditch effort, whatever this was supposed to be, had imploded. I don't know what I'm doing here," I mumbled, the words barely audible. Then, with as much dignity as a man soaked to the bone and reeking of whiskey could muster, I turned and walked back out into the relentless rain. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking, and finally managed to unlock my car. I slumped into the driver's seat, the rain drumming a mournful rhythm on the roof. I rested my head against the steering wheel, the cold plastic a small comfort. How had it come to this? How had the love of my life ended up marrying someone else while I was reduced to this pathetic, drunken mess? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Marco, my best friend. "Did you actually do it? Tell me you didn't crash her wedding." I couldn't bring myself to reply. I just started the car, the engine sputtering to life, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the glowing warmth of the reception behind. As the venue disappeared in my rearview mirror, a single thought echoed in my mind, a chilling premonition. This isn't even the worst part of our story. No, the worst part was knowing, deep down, that I had seen this coming, and I had done nothing to stop it. The worst part was knowing I had let her slip through my fingers. It all started 2 years ago. I was 28, a moderately successful app developer. I had my own small company, a decent apartment in Brooklyn, and a life I'd carefully constructed to be independent, predictable, and safe. I told myself I was content. But if I was honest, I was lonely. My work was fulfilling, but my evenings were quiet. My weekends often spent coding or catching up on sleep. My social life revolved around my tight-knit group of friends, Marco, the ever-optimistic and loyal wingman. Danny, sharp-witted and fiercely protective. And Jesse, the laid-back, go-with-the-flow type. They were my family, but there was a void, a longing for something more. Then I met Eliza. It was at a tech conference, one of those sprawling, impersonal events I usually dreaded. I was there to network, maybe pick up a few new clients. She was a presenter talking about user experience design with a passion and intelligence that captivated me from the moment she stepped onto the stage. She was vibrant, her energy filling the sterile conference room. Her ideas were brilliant, her arguments compelling. I found myself leaning forward in my seat, forgetting about the stale coffee and the droning presentations that had preceded hers. After her talk, I managed to catch her by the coffee station. I mumbled something about enjoying her presentation, expecting a polite nod before she was swarmed by other admirers. But she smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, and asked me what I did. That simple question led to an hour-long conversation, a whirlwind of shared interests and intellectual sparring. There was an instant connection, a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Coffee turned into dinner at a small Italian place nearby. Dinner turned into an all-night conversation, wandering through the city streets, talking about everything and nothing. We were different. That was clear from the start. I was straightforward, a planner, someone who liked steady progress. Eliza was a force of nature, ambitious, impulsive, always chasing the next big thing. She had a restless energy that was both exhilarating and a little intimidating. I introduced her to Marco, Danny, and Jesse a few weeks later. They were initially skeptical. I hadn't brought a girl around in ages, but Eliza, with her easy charm and quick wit, won them over. Marco pulled me aside later that night. "She's a lot, man," he said, a grin on his face. "But I like her. Don't mess this up." Our third date ended with a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. The city lights glittered below us. The air was crisp and cool. As we reached the midpoint, surrounded by the hum of the city, I stopped. She turned to look at me, a question in her eyes. I didn't say anything. I just leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a dramatic movie-style kiss. It was soft, hesitant at first, then deepening as the connection between us solidified. It felt like coming home. The next few weeks were a blur of text messages that made me smile like an idiot at my phone, late-night calls and stolen moments. "Thinking of you," she'd text, and my whole day would brighten. "Can't wait to see you tonight," I'd reply, the anticipation already building. "I think she might be the one, Marco," I confessed one night over beers. He just clapped me on the shoulder. "About damn time, Nate." The first "I love you" came during a weekend trip upstate. We'd rented a small cabin by a lake. It was autumn, and the leaves were a riot of red and gold. We were sitting by the fire, a comfortable silence between us, when she turned to me, her eyes shining in the firelight. "I love you, Nathan," she said, her voice soft but certain. The words sent a jolt through me, a wave of warmth and terror. "I love you too, Eliza," I replied. And in that moment, I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. I'd never felt this kind of connection, this deep, soul-level understanding with anyone before. It felt like my world had finally clicked into place. Slowly, Eliza started to open up about her past. She'd had a string of intense relationships, she told me. Relationships that burned bright and fast, then fizzled out just as quickly. She had a tendency to fall hard and fast, to throw herself completely into things. There were occasional mentions of an ex, Daniel. Just snippets, usually when she was talking about a past project or a trip she'd taken. "Daniel and I went there once," she'd say casually, or "Daniel had this crazy idea about..." I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone has a past. There were other little things, warning signs I chose to ignore. Her moods could shift quickly, from passionate and engaged to distant and preoccupied. Sometimes she'd get quiet, a shadow passing over her bright energy, and I wouldn't know why. But then she'd flash that dazzling smile, pull me close, and I'd forget all my fleeting doubts. I was so caught up in the whirlwind of loving her, so convinced that what we had was different, special, that I pushed aside any uneasiness. I was too busy building our future to see the cracks already forming in the foundation. 8 months. That's how long it took for us to decide to move in together. It felt fast, but also completely natural. Like the next logical step in a story that was writing itself. We found a sun-drenched apartment in Park Slope, with big windows and a small balcony perfect for morning coffee. Our life quickly settled into a rhythm of domestic bliss. We cooked together, sometimes successfully, sometimes ending in takeout and laughter. We built IKEA furniture, a true test of any relationship, and emerged victorious, if slightly traumatized. We planned weekend trips, exploring little towns upstate or heading to the beach. We had routines. Sunday morning brunch, Wednesday night movie marathons, quiet evenings spent reading side by side on the couch. It was perfect, or so I believed. That Christmas, I took Eliza home to meet my family. My mom, who usually viewed any woman I brought home with a healthy dose of suspicion, adored her instantly. My dad, a man of few words, actually engaged her in a long conversation about her work. My sister, usually my toughest critic, pulled me aside and whispered, "She's a keeper, Nate. Don't screw this one up." Hearing their approval, seeing how effortlessly Eliza fit into my world, solidified what I already felt. This was it. This was the woman I was going to spend my life with. Professionally, we were both thriving. My app development company was landing bigger clients, and Eliza was making a name for herself as a brilliant tech consultant. I encouraged her to go out on her own, to start her own consultancy. I helped her build her website, brainstorm business plans, and navigate the terrifying early days of entrepreneurship. Seeing her succeed, watching her passion and ambition translate into tangible results, made me prouder than I'd ever been of my own achievements. Then, a shadow fell over our perfect year. My mom got sick. It wasn't life-threatening, thank God, but it was a scary few months of tests, uncertainty, and hospital visits. Eliza was my rock. She was there for me, unwavering in her support. She came to appointments, cooked meals for my parents, and listened patiently as I vented my fears and frustrations. She held me when I cried. Her quiet strength a comfort I desperately needed. Seeing her by my side through that difficult time, so compassionate and capable, only deepened my love for her. It showed me a different side of her, a maturity and a depth that went beyond the vibrant, ambitious woman I'd first fallen for. We started talking more seriously about the future. Not in concrete terms, not yet, but there were hints, unspoken understandings. We'd talk about where we wanted to travel, the kind of house we'd like to have one day, even silly things like what kind of dog we'd get. Marriage wasn't a word we used often, but it hung in the air, a possibility that felt both exciting and inevitable. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. We had small disagreements, the kind that all couples have. Whose turn it was to do the dishes, what movie to watch, her habit of leaving her shoes scattered by the door. But we always managed to resolve them, to talk things through, to apologize and forgive. We were good at that, I thought. We were good at communicating. As our 1-year anniversary approached, I knew what I wanted to do. I started shopping for engagement rings. Marco, bless his heart, patiently accompanied me to a dozen jewelry stores, offering surprisingly insightful advice. I finally found the perfect one. A simple, elegant diamond that reminded me of Eliza's own understated beauty. I planned the perfect evening for our anniversary. Dinner at our favorite little French restaurant in the West Village, the one where we'd had our first truly fancy date. I was a nervous wreck all day, checking the ring in its velvet box 100 times. The evening was everything I'd hoped for. The food was exquisite, the wine flowed, and Eliza looked radiant. We laughed and reminisced about our first year together, the memories painting a picture of a love story I was desperate to continue. As dessert arrived, my heart was pounding in my chest. This was it. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the small box. I took a deep breath, ready to change our lives forever. I started to slide out of my seat, to get down on one knee, and then she stopped me. "Nathan," she said, her voice quiet, her eyes suddenly clouded with something I couldn't decipher. "Wait. There's something I need to tell you first." The words hung in the air, a sudden chill in the warm, romantic atmosphere. The perfect evening, the perfect year, suddenly felt fragile, like a beautiful glass ornament poised to shatter. "There's something I need to tell you first." Eliza's words echoed in the small, intimate space of the restaurant. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversation around us faded into a dull roar in my ears. My hand froze in my pocket, still clutching the velvet box. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but a knot of dread was already tightening in my stomach. She took a shaky breath. I had lunch with Daniel earlier this week." Daniel? Her ex? The one whose name had occasionally surfaced in casual conversation, always with a strange, almost imperceptible inflection in her voice. My mind reeled. Lunch? Why? "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process this. "And it was innocent," she insisted, a little too quickly. "Just catching up. He was in town for work, and he reached out. We haven't seen each other in years." She wouldn't meet my eyes, her gaze fixed on the half-eaten creme brulee between us. That was the first red flag. Eliza, usually so direct, so confident, was visibly uncomfortable. My trust, something I'd given her so freely, so completely, began to waver. I remembered all those fleeting moments, the brief mentions of Daniel, the slight hesitations in her voice. Had I been a fool to ignore them? "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked, the question sharper than I intended. "I didn't want you to worry," she said. "It was nothing, really." But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a secret, a crack in the perfect facade of our relationship. The rest of the dinner was a stilted, awkward affair. The magic of the evening had evaporated, replaced by a thick cloud of unspoken questions and anxieties. Later that night, back in our apartment, the tension was unbearable. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I finally broke it. "Eliza, what's really going on?" She sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumped. And then the words came tumbling out, hesitant and tearful. "Daniel. He was the one that got away, Nathan. Or, I don't know, maybe I was that for him. It was complicated, we were young." "The one that got away?" My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Inside, though, a storm was raging. Jealousy, betrayal, a sickening sense of inadequacy. "So what does that make me? The consolation prize?" "No, of course not," she cried, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. "I love you, Nathan. You know I do. It's just... seeing him again, it brought back a lot of old feelings. Confusion, mostly." That night we had our first major fight. Accusations were thrown, tears were shed. I ended up sleeping on the couch. The unfamiliar lumps and the chill of the living room a stark contrast to the warmth of our bed, the warmth of her body next to mine. The next morning we talked, or rather, Eliza talked, and I listened, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. She apologized profusely. She swore that Daniel was in the past, that seeing him had just been a momentary lapse in judgment, a nostalgic blip. She promised it wouldn't happen again. She loved me. She wanted to build a future with me. I wanted to believe her, desperately. The thought of losing her, of our carefully constructed life crumbling around us, was unbearable. So, I made a decision. I chose to trust her. I pushed the proposal plans to the back of my mind, telling myself I just needed a little more time, that we needed to get back on solid ground. But things weren't the same. An undercurrent of doubt had seeped into our relationship, poisoning the easy intimacy we'd once shared. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Eliza was on her phone more often, a secretive smile playing on her lips as she texted. My stomach would clench every time I saw it. Was she talking to him? My paranoia grew, feeding on my insecurities. One evening, when she was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before, something I was instantly ashamed of. I picked up her phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages. And there it was, a long thread of messages between Eliza and Daniel. Not just innocent catching up. There were inside jokes, shared memories, discussions about their past, and were those flirtatious undertones? Or was I just imagining it? The confrontation that followed was even worse than the first. I laid the phone on the coffee table between us, the screen glowing with their incriminating exchanges. "You're still talking to him," I said, my voice quiet. Dangerous. This time there were no easy denials. Eliza broke down, admitting she was confused about her feelings. She loved me, she insisted, but there was this pull towards Daniel, this unresolved history that she couldn't seem to shake. My pride screamed at me to walk away, to tell her I deserved better. But my love for her, the deep, entrenched roots of our shared life, held me captive. I was torn. How could she do this to us? To me? Through her tears, Eliza made another promise, a more forceful one this time. She would cut off all contact with Daniel. She would block his number, delete him from her life. She wanted to make things work with me, she pleaded. She just needed me to trust her, to give her another chance. And like a fool, I did. I clung to her promises, to the hope that we could somehow navigate our way back to the perfect year we'd shared. The relationship seemingly got back on track. We went on dates, we laughed, we made love. But the doubt lingered, a silent, unwelcome guest in our home, a constant reminder of the cracks that now ran deep beneath the surface of our love. 6 months. 6 months of trying to rebuild, of pretending everything was fine. 6 months of a fragile peace built on Eliza's promises and my desperate hope. Then, one Tuesday morning, as I was getting ready for work, I found it. A small silver hoop earring, glinting on the dark wood of our bedside table. It wasn't Eliza's. I knew all her jewelry. This was unfamiliar. A cold dread washed over me. The late nights at work started to make a sickening kind of sense. The way she'd been more distant lately, her laughter not quite reaching her eyes. The way her phone was always angled away from me, her fingers flying across the screen with a new urgency. Was this it? Was my worst fear materializing? My mind became a battlefield. One part of me, the rational, trusting part that still loved her, urged me to ask her about it, to believe there was an innocent explanation. The other part, the wounded, suspicious part, screamed at me to investigate, to find the truth, no matter how painful. I confided in Marco. "I don't know what to do, man," I said, pacing his small living room. "I found this earring. It's not hers." Marco, ever the pragmatist, didn't try to sugarcoat it. "You need to confront her, Nate. You can't live like this, torturing yourself with what-ifs. You deserve to know." His words, though harsh, were what I needed to hear. But I couldn't just rely on an earring. I needed more. The next day, our shared credit card statement arrived. My eyes scanned the list of charges, my heart pounding. And there it was, a charge from a boutique hotel downtown, a hotel neither of us had ever mentioned staying at. The date corresponded with one of Eliza's late nights at the office. The confrontation was inevitable, a storm that had been brewing for months. I waited until she got home from work that evening. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid the earring and the credit card statement on the kitchen counter. "Explain this, Eliza," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil raging inside me. She looked at the items, then at me, her face paling. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a look of utter desolation. And then came the tears. Not the crocodile tears of before, but deep, shuddering sobs of guilt and regret. She admitted it. She'd been seeing Daniel again. It had started a few weeks after she'd promised to cut him off. A text message here, a quick coffee there. Then it had escalated. The conversation that followed was the most heart-wrenching of my life. She insisted she still loved me, that she didn't want to lose me. But she also admitted she still had feelings for Daniel, strong feelings. "It's different with him, Nathan," she choked out between sobs. "It's a connection I can't explain, something I've never been able to shake." My shock slowly morphed into a white-hot anger, then into a devastating, soul-crushing hurt. "So, what? You want both of us?" I asked, my voice laced with a bitterness I didn't recognize as my own. "No, I don't know," she cried. "I'm so confused. I don't want to hurt you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." And then came the line that shattered the last vestiges of my hope. The line that would echo in my nightmares for months to come. "I love you, Nathan," she whispered, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "But there's always been this pull toward him that I can't fight." A pull she couldn't fight. Or wouldn't. What was the difference? All I knew was that I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live in this limbo, constantly wondering if I was enough, if she would choose me. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't take much, just the essentials. I couldn't bear to look at our things, the shared memories woven into the fabric of our apartment. I moved in with Marco. He didn't ask many questions. He just gave me a spare key, a sympathetic look, and a beer. The following week was a blur of desperate calls and texts from Eliza, pleading, apologizing, begging me to reconsider. I ignored most of them. My heart was a raw, open wound, and every message from her was like salt poured into it. Finally, I agreed to meet her. We chose a neutral cafe, a sterile, impersonal place that held no memories for us. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen, her usual vibrant energy completely extinguished. She asked for time. Time to figure things out, to sort through her feelings. Time to decide what she really wanted. "A break," she called it. I agreed. What else could I do? A part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, still clung to the possibility that she would choose me, that she would realize what she was throwing away. So I said yes to the break, a lifeline thrown into the churning waters of my despair. I told myself it was for her, to give her the space she needed. But deep down, I knew it was for me too. A desperate, last-ditch attempt to hold on to the woman I still loved, even as she was slipping further and further away. The break was a special kind of hell. Limbo. I threw myself into work, coding late into the night, taking on extra projects, anything to fill the gaping void Eliza had left in my life and in my tiny spare room at Marco's. The silence in my new, temporary apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the constant hum of life I'd shared with her. I started therapy. Dr. Evans was a kind, middle-aged woman with a calm voice and an uncanny ability to see right through my carefully constructed defenses. We talked about Eliza, of course, but we also delved into my own issues, my fear of abandonment, my struggles with self-worth. It was grueling, painful work, like peeling back layers of an old wound, but slowly, incrementally, I started to understand myself a little better. My friends were amazing. Marco, Danny, and Jesse rallied around me, offering distractions, shoulders to cry on, and endless, well-meaning advice. "You need to move on, Nate," Danny would say gently. "She doesn't deserve you." I knew they were right, but my heart refused to listen. I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. I refused to date. The thought of being with someone else, of trying to build something new when the wreckage of my old life was still smoldering, felt impossible. My focus, whether I admitted it to myself or not, was still on Eliza. We had weekly check-ins, as per our agreement. Short, stilted phone calls that became increasingly distant with each passing week. "How are you?" she'd ask, her voice carefully neutral. "Fine," I'd reply, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. We talked about superficial things, work, the weather, mutual friends. We never talked about us. We never talked about Daniel. But I knew. I kept tabs on them, a shameful habit I couldn't seem to break. A quick scroll through Eliza's social media, a glance at Daniel's public profile. Pictures of them together started to appear. A weekend trip to the coast, a cozy dinner with friends. Each photo was a fresh stab to my already bleeding heart. One evening, I ran into Daniel at a restaurant. I was there with Marco, trying to have a normal night out. He was at the bar, waiting for a table. Our eyes met. There was a moment of awkward recognition. Then he nodded, a polite, almost sympathetic gesture. I nodded back, a knot of anger and humiliation tightening in my gut. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The waiting, the uncertainty, the constant thrum of anxiety, it was all taking its toll. One night, after too many whiskeys, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't do. I drunk-dialed Eliza. The words poured out of me, a torrent of pain, love, and recrimination. I told her I missed her, that I still loved her, that I didn't understand how she could do this to us. I poured my heart out, a pathetic, slurring mess. The next morning, shame and regret washed over me in waves. And then, a knock on my apartment door. It was Eliza. She looked concerned, her eyes searching mine. "Are you okay, Nathan?" she asked softly. And in that moment, my resolve crumbled. The loneliness, the longing, it was too much. We ended up in bed, one night, a moment of weakness, a desperate attempt to recapture what we'd lost. It was passionate, intense, but underneath it all there was a profound sadness. This wasn't a reconciliation, this was a goodbye. Afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, the silence heavy between us, she confessed. "I'm still seeing him, Nathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think I'm falling in love with him." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. So, this was it. My false hope, shattered into a million pieces. I didn't say anything. I just got out of bed, pulled on my clothes, and watched as she did the same. There were no more tears, no more pleading. Just a heavy, suffocating silence. She left, and I was alone again, in the wreckage of my own making. That was my rock bottom. Alone in my sterile apartment, the scent of her perfume still lingering in the air, a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. The pain was a living thing, coiling in my gut, squeezing my chest. I didn't know how I was going to get through this. A few days later, my sister called. She'd heard from Marco what was going on. She didn't coddle me. She didn't offer platitudes. She just laid out the harsh, unvarnished truth. "Nathan," she said, her voice firm but kind, "you need to let her go. She's made her choice, and it isn't you. You deserve better than this. You deserve someone who chooses you without hesitation, without reservation." Her words, though painful, were a lifeline. She forced me to confront the reality I'd been so desperately trying to avoid. Eliza wasn't coming back, and even if she did, could I ever really trust her again? Could we ever go back to what we were? Slowly, agonizingly, I started to accept it. The break was over. We were over. 3 weeks later, an email from Eliza landed in my inbox. The subject line simply read, "Talk?" My heart lurched. What now? What more could she possibly want from me? With trembling fingers, I opened it. The message was brief, to the point. "Can we talk? It's important." We met at our old favorite coffee shop, the one around the corner from the apartment we used to share. The aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon, once a comfort, now felt like a cruel taunt. I got there early, my hands clammy, my stomach churning. A tiny, stubborn ember of hope still flickered within me. Maybe this was it. Maybe she'd realized her mistake. Maybe she was finally choosing me. Eliza arrived a few minutes later, looking flustered and nervous. She avoided my gaze as she ordered her usual latte, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her purse. We found a small table in the corner, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. She struggled to begin, her sentences fragmented, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nathan, this is so hard." "Just say it, Eliza," I said, my patience wearing thin. The suspense was killing me. She took a deep breath, then reached into her purse. For a wild, irrational moment, I thought she was going to pull out a ring, my ring, the one I'd never had the chance to give her. But instead, she produced a small, familiar velvet box. Not the ring box, something else. My heart sank. She pushed it across the table towards me. "This is yours," she said softly. I opened it. Inside, nestled on the faded velvet, was the key to our old apartment. My key. The one I hadn't bothered to take when I'd moved out, clinging to some subconscious hope that I'd be back. "Daniel asked me to marry him," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush, and I said yes. My world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of cups, the low murmur of conversation receded into a distant hum. All I could hear was the roaring in my ears, the shattering of that final, foolish ember of hope. "He proposed last week," she continued, her eyes filled with tears. "And I realized that I have to choose, Nathan. I can't keep stringing you along. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to him." "So you're choosing him," I stated, my voice devoid of inflection. It wasn't a question. I already knew the answer. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I love you, Nathan. A part of me will always love you. You were so good to me. So steady, so kind. But Daniel, he's my soulmate. I know that sounds like a cliché, but it's true. There's this pull, this connection that I can't deny anymore." Soulmate. The word felt like a punch to the gut. So, what had we been? A placeholder? A comfortable stopgap until her soulmate decided to reappear? Then came the line that felt like the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. "You deserve someone who puts you first, Nathan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I realize now that's never going to be me." I sat there, stunned into silence, the weight of her words crushing me. My mind reeled, trying to process the finality of it all. This was it. The end. There would be no more chances, no more maybes. She had made her choice. And it wasn't me. Strangely, a sense of quiet dignity settled over me. The fight had gone out of me. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. I had loved her with everything I had, and it hadn't been enough. Can we still be friends?" she asked, her voice hesitant, hopeful. A hollow laugh escaped my lips. Friends? After this? After she'd ripped my heart out and handed it back to me in pieces? "I don't think so, Eliza," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I stood up, pushing the chair back. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I just turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting there with her tears and her choices. The moment I got into my car, the dam broke. Sobs racked my body, raw, agonizing gasps of pain and loss. I pounded the steering wheel, the anger and frustration finally erupting. It was over. Really, truly over. 8 weeks later, the wedding invitation arrived. Cream-colored cardstock, elegant script, addressed to Nathan Reynolds and guest. The cruelty of it, the sheer insensitivity, was breathtaking. Did she really expect me to come? To watch her marry the man she'd chosen over me? I threw it in the trash. The sight of her name linked with his a fresh wave of nausea. The months that followed were a blur of depression, self-destruction, and too much alcohol. I was adrift, lost in a sea of grief and bitterness. Marco tried his best, dragging me out to social events, trying to get me interested in life again. It was at one of these forced outings, a group hike he'd organized, that I first met Zoe. She was a friend of Danny's, new in town. She was bright, funny, and easy to talk to. But I was too damaged, too raw to even consider pursuing anything. I barely registered her presence, my mind still trapped in the wreckage of my past. Eliza had made her choice, and in doing so, she had made me her past. The problem was, I hadn't yet figured out how to make her mine. The morning of Eliza and Daniel's wedding dawned gray and bleak, a perfect reflection of my mood. I woke up with a dull headache and the bitter taste of last night's whiskey still on my tongue. I'd RSVP'd that I wouldn't be attending, a small act of self-preservation. There was no way I could watch her say "I do" to another man. My phone buzzed. "Marco, you okay, man?" "Peachy?" I typed back, the sarcasm practically dripping from the screen. I knew he was just trying to look out for me, but I wasn't in the mood for his well-intentioned concern. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I went for a run, hoping to sweat out the toxins and the misery. I cleaned my apartment with a manic energy, scrubbing away imaginary dirt as if I could scrub away the memories of Eliza. I even tried to work, but the lines of code on my screen blurred into an incomprehensible jumble. Nothing worked. Her face, her smile, the ghost of her laughter haunted every corner of my mind. As the afternoon wore on, the gray sky grew darker, more ominous. The air grew heavy, charged with an unspoken tension, just like my heart. I found myself drawn to the small, wooden box tucked away in the back of my closet. The box where I kept all the remnants of our life together. Old photos, us smiling, laughing, caught in moments of unadulterated happiness. Ticket stubs from concerts and movies. A silly keychain she'd bought me on a whim. Each item was a tiny shard of glass, piercing my already wounded soul. And then I started drinking. A glass of whiskey to numb the pain. Then another, and another. The alcohol didn't make the pain go away, but it dulled the sharp edges, blurring the harsh reality into a fuzzy, manageable haze. Sometime around 5 o'clock, a reckless, booze-fueled idea began to take root in my mind. I should go. Just to see. Not to make a scene. Not to cause trouble. Just to, I don't know. Get closure? Witness the final act of our tragic play. The justifications were flimsy, a pathetic attempt to rationalize an irrational urge. I knew it was a terrible idea. Marco would kill me. My sister would disown me. But the pull, the morbid curiosity was too strong to resist. I found myself grabbing my keys, my steps unsteady as I headed for the door. I drove to the wedding venue, a grand, stately manor on the outskirts of the city. I parked my car at the edge of the sprawling parking lot, hidden by a row of overgrown hedges. From there, I had a clear view of the outdoor ceremony area, a picturesque garden adorned with white roses and flickering candles. I watched as the guests took their seats, a sea of pastel dresses and dark suits. I watched as Daniel, looking dapper and annoyingly composed, took his place at the altar. And then I watched as Eliza, a vision in white, walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She was beautiful, more beautiful than I'd ever seen her, and she was radiant, her smile genuine, her eyes shining with a happiness that had nothing to do with me. That was the hardest part to bear. As they exchanged their vows, the words muffled by the distance and the growing lump in my throat, the sky finally broke. The rain started as a gentle drizzle, then quickly escalated into a torrential downpour, a fitting soundtrack to the storm raging inside me. The ceremony ended abruptly, the guests scrambling for cover. And that's when I made my move. Fueled by whiskey and a desperate, aching sorrow, I got out of my car and started walking towards the reception hall. I just need closure, I told myself, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead, my clothes quickly becoming soaked. I just need to see her one last time. I reached the heavy oak doors, the sounds of music and laughter spilling out from within. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the alcohol making me reckless, bold. And then I pushed the doors open. The scene that unfolded was exactly as I'd replayed it in my mind 1,000 times since. The music screeching to a halt, the heads turning, Eliza's shocked face, Daniel's calm, infuriating composure, the security guards, my pathetic, mumbled apology, my shame-faced retreat back into the storm. I drove away from the venue, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a crushing wave of shame and regret. What had I done? What had I been thinking? Back in my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, the wet clothes clinging to me, the chill seeping into my bones. This was it. Rock bottom. I had officially become the pathetic ex-boyfriend, the cautionary tale, the guy who couldn't let go. Sometime around midnight, there was a knock on my door. I ignored it. It was probably just a neighbor complaining about the noise I wasn't making. But the knocking persisted, firm, insistent. With a groan, I dragged myself off the couch and opened the door. Marco stood there, a bag of takeout in one hand, a six-pack of beer in the other. His expression wasn't judgmental or angry or even disappointed. It was just understanding. He didn't say anything. He just walked past me, set the food and beer on the coffee table, and sat down on the couch. I stood there, dripping and lost, not knowing what to say. And then it all came pouring out. The pain, the grief, the shame, the anger. I broke down right there in front of him, sobbing like a child. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't offer platitudes or advice. He just sat there, a silent, steady presence, letting me release all the pent-up emotion I'd been carrying for so long. When the sobs finally subsided, leaving me exhausted and empty, Marco finally spoke. His voice was quiet, gentle. "Now," he said, handing me a bottle of beer, "now you can finally start to heal." And for the first time in a long, long time, I actually believed him. 3 months. 3 months since the wedding, since my public meltdown, since Marco had picked me up from the metaphorical floor. 3 months of therapy, of actively, painfully working on myself. Dr. Evans was a godsend, guiding me through the labyrinth of my grief, helping me understand my patterns, my triggers, my deep-seated fear of not being enough. It wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to quit, to crawl back into the bottle and hide from the world. But I kept going, one session, one breakthrough, one small step at a time. Then an opportunity arose. A new job. A fantastic job, actually. Head of product development for a promising tech startup. The catch? It was in Seattle. 3,000 miles away from New York, from Eliza, from the ghosts of my past. The decision, surprisingly, was easy. I needed this. I needed a fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to rebuild my life in a place where no one knew my story, where I wasn't Eliza's ex. My friends, bless them, were incredibly supportive. We had a goodbye gathering at our favorite dive bar, a bittersweet evening filled with laughter, reminiscing, and a few too many shots. Marco, Danny, and Jesse promised to visit to keep our traditions alive, even across the miles. Packing up my apartment was a cathartic experience. I went through my belongings with a ruthless efficiency, discarding anything that reminded me of Eliza, of our life together. Photos, gifts, clothes she'd left behind. It all went into a large black trash bag. There was a strange satisfaction in watching the sanitation truck haul it away, a symbolic severing of the ties that bound me to her. The final step was deleting her from social media, blocking her number, erasing every digital trace of her existence from my life. It felt drastic, almost cruel, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't heal if I was constantly looking over my shoulder, constantly tempted to check up on her, to see if she was happy, to see if she ever regretted her choice. A few days before I left, a text message from Eliza popped up on my phone. "Heard you're moving. How are you doing?" My finger hovered over the reply button. A part of me, the old, wounded part, wanted to lash out, to tell her it was none of her business. Another part, the foolish, sentimental part, wanted to tell her I was fine, to wish her well. In the end, I did neither. I just deleted the message, unanswered. She was part of my past now. And that's where she needed to stay. The cross-country drive was long, solitary, and strangely therapeutic. Miles of open road unfolded before me, a tangible representation of the new path I was forging. I had a lot of time to think, to reflect, to process everything that had happened. There were moments of sadness, of anger, of regret, but there were also moments of hope, of cautious optimism, of a burgeoning sense of freedom. I arrived in Seattle on a drizzly October afternoon. The rain, which had once felt like a symbol of my despair, now seemed cleansing. The lush green landscape, so different from the concrete jungle of New York, felt symbolic of renewal, of new growth. Setting up my new apartment was an exercise in creating a space that was entirely mine. No shared memories, no ghosts of relationships past. Just clean lines, modern furniture, and a stunning view of Puget Sound. I joined a hiking club, a book club, a weekly coding meetup. I was determined to build a new social circle, to create a life for myself in this new city. I reconnected with an old college friend, Liam, who, by sheer coincidence, had also ended up in Seattle. We fell back into an easy camaraderie, exploring the city's craft breweries and quirky neighborhoods. It was nice to have a familiar face in an unfamiliar place. My first day at the new job was a whirlwind of introductions, meetings, and new challenges. I felt a spark of excitement, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. This was good. This was what I needed. A few weeks later, at a company happy hour, I saw a familiar face across the crowded room. Zoe. The woman I'd briefly met at Marco's disastrous group hike. She'd recently transferred to the Seattle office. Small world. We struck up a conversation, easy and natural. She was even funnier and smarter than I remembered. We talked about work, about Seattle, about our shared love of bad puns. There was an undeniable chemistry, a spark of something interesting. But I wasn't ready. My heart was still a construction zone, littered with debris and caution tape. When she casually suggested we grab dinner sometime, I hesitated. "Zoe," I said, "you're great, and I've really enjoyed talking to you, but I'm just not in a place where I can date. Not yet." She didn't press. She didn't look offended or disappointed. She just smiled, a warm, understanding smile. "I get it, Nathan," she said. "No pressure. But when you are ready, I'll still be interested." Her words, her understanding, her complete lack of pressure settled something in me. As I walked home that night, the Seattle drizzle a soft mist on my face, I realized that while my heart was still healing, it no longer felt shattered. It was bruised, yes, and scarred, but it was starting to mend. Maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my Seattle apartment, a mug of coffee warming my hands, looking out at the familiar gray sky. It felt like home now. The city, the rain, the rhythm of life here. It had all seeped into my bones, becoming a part of me. My career was thriving. The startup was doing well, and I loved the challenges and the camaraderie of my team. I had a solid group of friends, a mix of old and new faces. Liam was still my go-to for brewery explorations, and I'd become a regular at the hiking club, discovering the breathtaking beauty of the Pacific Northwest. My phone buzzed with an incoming FaceTime call. Marco. His grinning face filled the screen. "Guess what, buddy?" he said, his voice full of excitement. "I'm coming to Seattle. Booked my flight for next month." A genuine smile spread across my face. "That's awesome, man. Can't wait to show you around." We chatted for a while, catching up on news from New York, laughing about old times. Then, Marco's expression turned a little more serious. "So," he said, "Eliza reached out to me the other day, asked how you were doing." I waited for the familiar pang, the twinge of sadness or anger that her name usually evoked, but this time nothing. Just a faint, distant echo of a memory, like a song I used to know the words to but couldn't quite recall. "Oh?" I said, my voice surprisingly neutral. "And what did you tell her?" "Told her you were doing great," Marco said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Told her you were happy." He paused, then added, "She and Daniel are having problems, apparently. Talking about separating." I processed this news. A year ago, it would have sent a jolt of vindictive satisfaction through me. Now, I felt nothing. A strange, detached indifference. Their problems were their own. They had no bearing on my life, on my happiness. "She might try to reach out to you, Nate," Marco said, his voice cautious. "She can try," I said, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't take her back. Not now, not ever. That chapter of my life was closed, the book firmly shut. A few weeks later, Marco arrived in Seattle. We had a blast. I showed him all my favorite spots: Pike Place Market, Discovery Park, the quirky shops in Fremont. One evening, we had dinner at a trendy new restaurant downtown, and Zoe joined us. Over the past year, Zoe and I had built a solid friendship. We'd grabbed coffee occasionally, gone on a few group hikes, and discovered a shared love for obscure board games. There was an easy chemistry between us, a comfortable understanding that had grown organically, without pressure or expectation. Marco, with his usual lack of subtlety, noticed it immediately. After Zoe left to use the restroom, he leaned across the table, a knowing grin on his face. "You look at her differently than you ever looked at Eliza, Nate," he said. "It's good to see." He was right. There was a lightness with Zoe, a sense of joy and anticipation that I hadn't realized I was missing. It wasn't the all-consuming, dramatic fire I'd had with Eliza. It was something quieter, steadier, but just as powerful. Maybe even more so. Later that night, I walked Zoe home. The air was crisp and cold, and a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the city in a soft white blanket. We stood on her doorstep, the silence comfortable, charged with a new kind of anticipation. "I had a really great time tonight, Nathan," she said, her eyes sparkling in the soft glow of the porch light. "Me too, Zoe," I replied. And then I leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, gentle kiss, full of unspoken promise and a burgeoning hope. It felt right. She smiled when we broke apart, a shy, happy smile. "You want to come in?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. I hesitated. As much as I wanted to, I also wanted to do this right, to savor it, to build something real, something lasting. "Actually," I said, "how about we have a proper date tomorrow night? Just you and me." Her smile widened. "I'd like that very much," she said. I walked home alone, the snow crunching softly under my boots. But I didn't feel alone. I felt content, hopeful, excited about the future for the first time in a long, long time. As I unlocked my apartment door, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at the screen. My heart skipped a beat. It was from Eliza. Subject: "I made a mistake." My finger hovered over the message. A flicker of the old pain, the old anger, surfaced for a fleeting moment. Then, it was gone, replaced by a sense of calm, of closure. I knew without even reading it what it would say. But it didn't matter anymore. I read the first line. "Nathan, I made a terrible mistake. Can we talk?" A small, ironic smile touched my lips. A moment of vindication, perhaps, but no desire to respond, no desire to revisit that painful past. I deleted the email without replying. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Zoe. "Looking forward to tomorrow night? How about Italian? 7:30? Her reply came back almost instantly. "Perfect. Can't wait." I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. The future stretched out before me, bright and full of possibilities. And as I looked out at the snow-covered city, a final thought settled in my mind, clear and true. Some people are meant to be in your past so better people can be in your future. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my future was just beginning.